Walk into the Egyptian wing of a museum, or leaf through the yellowed pages of an alchemy book, and sooner or later you'll meet it. A circle. Not a perfect one. More like something doodled absent-mindedly by someone waiting for inspiration. Look closer though, and you'll see the curve has scales, a head and teeth. The tail disappears into the mouth. A snake, eating itself. The Ouroboros, the reptile that refuses to mind its own business, choosing instead to make dinner out of itself forever. It is one of humanity's oldest symbols, appearing in Egypt over 3,000 years ago, winding its way through Greek philosophy, coiling into Gnostic and Hermetic texts, slithering through medieval alchemy, and later curling into the notebooks of Carl Jung. Somewhere between the tomb walls of pharaohs and the self-help section of today's bookstores, this endlessly hungry snake has managed to survive. Appropriately, the Ouroboros is the one thing that can't be killed, because it always eats itself back into existence. At first glance it seems obvious enough. Eternity, the endless cycle, life renewing itself. If it were printed on a yoga mat, you might shrug and move on. But for the ancients, it was never just decoration. It was a riddle. What sort of world devours itself to survive? What sort of universe renews itself by destruction? The Ouroboros didn't say life goes on in a comforting way. It said life consumes itself and calls it progress. That was the unsettling part. Most religions promised escape, resurrection, paradise, enlightenment, or at least a better afterlife than the current mess. The Ouroboros promised no such thing. It offered a circle instead of a staircase. Round and round you go, reborn, devoured, reborn again. If you were hoping for a straight path to salvation, the snake politely hissed, wrong direction. It's not hard to see why people couldn't stop staring at it. Snakes already carried a heavy symbolic load. In Genesis they tempt, in Greece they heal, coiled around Asclepius's star. In Egypt they guard the underworld and encircle the sun god's boat. A creature that sheds its skin, disappears into holes, then re-emerges looking new, was always bound to seem uncanny. The Ouroboros condensed all that mystery into one unforgettable image. Time, eternity, life, and death compressed into a reptile biting itself. And the longer you look at it, the more unsettling it gets. The snake is trapped, but also complete, dying, but also immortal, ridiculous, yet profound. Try to laugh it off, silly snake doesn't know how food works. And suddenly you realize that you too are caught in cycles of eating, working, sleeping, repeating, until one day you vanish, replaced by someone else who looks suspiciously like you, starting the whole thing over again. The Ouroboros is funny until it isn't. That's why it fascinated philosophers and terrified some early Christians. It refused to play by the comforting rules of linear history. No Eden to Apocalypse story, no promise of before and after, just the circle. It said the end and the beginning are the same bite, the same moment, the same mouthful. Everything you destroy is also everything you create. The serpent never stops, and maybe that's why it has lasted. The image is absurd, but the truth beneath it is hard to shake. Stars are born, and die, and create new stars. Civilizations rise, collapse, and fertilize the soil for new empires. Your body kills and replaces its own cells constantly. On some level, existence does look like a snake chewing forever on itself. Picture the symbol hanging in a dimly lit tomb. A dead pharaoh lies inside, surrounded by riches he'll never spend. Painted above him, the snake coils, tail in mouth, silently declaring, "You're still inside me." The Ouroboros was not there to comfort, it was there to remind. No matter how grand your throne or how rich your tomb, you are only another loop in the snake's eternal meal. This is why the Ouroboros refuses to disappear. It is older than pyramids, and younger than psychology, a symbol too blunt to forget, and too mysterious to explain away. Wherever humans have wondered whether life is going anywhere, the snake has been waiting, circling, biting, whispering, that maybe it doesn't go anywhere at all. Like most things that echo through history, the Ouroboros begins in Egypt, that eternal factory of symbols. If you want a good origin story, you usually don't have to look much further than the Nile. By the time Greeks were still squabbling over city-states, Egyptians had already been painting serpents on tomb walls for 1,000 years, and one of those serpents was destined to become the Ouroboros. The first clear appearance comes in the enigmatic Book of the Netherworld, a text painted inside the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun around the 14th century BCE. Amid strange gods and solar boats, a serpent curls into a perfect circle, biting its tail. Scholars have argued about its meaning for centuries, which is appropriate because if there's anything an ancient Egyptian symbol loved, it was making you feel like you'd solved a riddle, only to realize you'd just found another one. In these tomb scenes, the Ouroboros is often wrapped around Ra, the sun god, as he sails through the underworld each night. The image suggests the serpent is both a guardian and a boundary. It circles the solar boat like a cosmic fence, holding chaos at bay. Inside the snake's loop, there is order. Outside, darkness and uncreation. The snake becomes not merely an animal but a cosmic line, a scaly reminder that the universe is precariously defended. Why a snake? The Egyptians had a complicated relationship with serpents. On the one hand, they were terrifying cobras hissed in the desert, vipers killed with a single strike. On the other hand, snakes shed their skin, emerging reborn. They vanished into the ground and reappeared, as if resurrected. This made them perfect for a culture obsessed with death and afterlife. A snake could embody both danger and renewal, destruction and eternity. Wrap it into a circle, and suddenly it becomes a symbol of everything the Egyptians cared about: death, rebirth, protection, and endless time. In some texts, the circular serpent was called Mien, a snake god whose very name meant coiled one. Mien was imagined as wrapping himself around Ra during his nightly journey through the underworld, shielding the sun from the chaos serpent Apophis, who constantly tried to swallow it. Each dawn, Ra triumphed, the snake uncoiled, and the cycle began again. It was cosmic theatre performed nightly, with snakes playing both villain and guardian, destroyer and protector. It must have been exhausting to be an Egyptian serpent. One day you're Satan, the next you're a bodyguard. The image of the tail-eating snake captured this duality beautifully. By biting its tail, the serpent completed itself, becoming eternal, unbreakable, both devourer and sustainer. It was an image of the universe, as the Egyptians imagined it, self-contained, cyclical, eternal. To live was to die was to live again, all within the great circle of the serpent. Later Egyptian magic texts also used the Ouroboros as a protective charm. Amulets bore the coiled snake to encircle the wearer in safety. In funerary papyri, the serpent ring appeared as a safeguard for the deceased soul. In each case, the message was the same: the snake that devours itself can also preserve you. To be inside its loop was to be guarded against chaos, tucked into eternity's embrace. When the Greeks encountered Egypt during the Hellenistic period, they fell in love with this imagery. To the philosophically minded Greeks, the Ouroboros wasn't just a funeral doodle, it was a cosmic thesis. Heraclitus, the gloomy philosopher, who declared that you can't step in the same river twice, would have adored the Ouroboros. Everything flows, everything returns, nothing ever truly ends. For the Greeks, the Egyptian snake became a symbol not just of rebirth, but of the unity of opposites, the paradox that destruction is creation in disguise. But before it was philosophy, before it was alchemy, before Jung sketched it into his notebooks, it was paint on a tomb wall, a serpent circling a solar god on a fragile boat. The pharaoh's architects and priests painted it not for us but for him, for Tutankhamun, who died young, and was meant to ride that boat into the afterlife, wrapped in eternity's coil. The Ouroboros was his guarantee that death was not the end, that the circle would hold, that the snake would swallow and regurgitate existence forever. It's easy to imagine the priests in their lamplit chambers, hunched over pigments, painting the serpent again and again with meticulous care. Did they think about the meaning, or was it so obvious to them that they didn't need to? We puzzle over it, but to them perhaps it was as plain as the sun. Life circles back, or the irony is delicious. Tutankhamun's tomb was sealed, his serpent painted, his eternity assured, until 1922, when Howard Carter pried it open and modern archaeology began. The boy king had been promised unbroken cycles, but his afterlife was interrupted by flashbulbs and tourists. Yet the snake on his wall still bites its tail, stubbornly holding its circle even as empires rise, fall, and send scholars with cameras into his resting place. The Ouroboros is older than most gods we still remember, older than Plato, older than Christianity, older than Islam. Its first appearance in Egypt was not its last. The snake would crawl out of the tomb, slither into Greek philosophy, curl around Gnostic scriptures, and later nestle into alchemical diagrams. But here, in the Valley of the Kings, it made its debut, a guardian serpent biting its tail, circling eternity like a scaly wedding ring for the cosmos. By the time the Ouroboros slithered out of Egypt and into the wider imagination, one fact was already clear: snakes were never just snakes. For ancient peoples, these creatures were living riddles, feared and revered in equal measure. They moved without legs, appeared and disappeared in silence, shed their skins as if cheating death, and delivered venom with a single bite. To live alongside snakes was to live alongside a mystery that no amount of farming, sacrifice, or stone building could fully control. No wonder the serpent became the mascot of eternity itself. The most obvious reason was the shedding of skin. To watch a snake peel itself out of its old casing and emerge glistening and new was for ancient eyes nothing less than rebirth. Humans aged visibly, their skin wrinkling and their bodies weakening, but the snake seemed to slip out of its mortality with a single wiggle, leaving the old husk behind like an unwanted cloak. Egyptians, Greeks, Indians, and Mesopotamians all noticed this trick, and most drew the same conclusion: snakes don't die like we do. They renew themselves. They carry eternity in their scales. But shedding was only the beginning. Snakes vanish. One moment they are in the grass, the next they have melted into the earth. Farmers must have stared, bewildered, as vipers slid into cracks and disappeared as if swallowed by the underworld. Later, out they came again, alive, unburned, unfazed. Unlike other animals, snakes seem to have a passport between worlds, surface and underground, life and death. That uncanny quality made them perfect guardians of thresholds, those liminal spaces where humans hoped to cross from mortal to immortal. And then there was the venom. A single bite could kill a soldier faster than any sword. To cultures without antidotes or hospitals, snakes embodied the swiftness of mortality. But here's the paradox. The same venom could heal when diluted. From Egypt to Greece, snake poison was used in medicine. A creature that could kill or cure with the same fluid was irresistible as a symbol. It was death and life, destruction and renewal, condensed into a few drops of venom. What better emblem of cycles could there be? Because of this, serpents wriggled into nearly every mythology that dealt with time, eternity, or creation. In Mesopotamia, Tiamat, the primordial chaos serpent, had to be slain by Marduk for the world to begin. In India, Vishnu reclines on the coils of Ananta, the endless serpent, while universes are created and destroyed in his dreams. In Greece, the staff of Asclepius, god of healing, bore a serpent as its companion, still our symbol for medicine today. And in Norse myth, Jormungandr, the world serpent, encircles the earth, tail in mouth, waiting until Ragnarok to release it and end the world. Different names, different continents, but the same fascination. Snakes are not linear. They are circles, cycles, return. This cyclical vision clashed with how humans preferred to think about life. We love lines. We love beginnings, middles, and ends. Birth, childhood, adulthood, death. It makes sense. Snakes mocked this neat diagram. They didn't go from A to B. They looped. They coiled. They circled back on themselves. And so they became guardians of the uncomfortable truth that maybe our lives are not a march, but a spiral. Maybe history itself is less a story and more a loop. The Ouroboros condensed all of this into a single haunting image. It wasn't just a snake eating its tail, it was the snake proving the cycle, with its body beginning devoured, end became beginning, all in one smooth curve. The creature that could shed skin, slip between worlds, kill and heal, was now the universe itself, gnawing forever, never finished. The ancients didn't invent this because they liked reptiles. They invented it because when they looked at a snake, they saw their own uneasy reflection. The fear came naturally. If eternity was a snake, then maybe it was also a trap. Who wants to live forever, if forever means repeating the same meal endlessly? Tail first. Early Christians recoiled at the idea of cycles, preferring a linear history: Eden, fall, redemption, resurrection, the end. For them, the Ouroboros was a dangerous rival symbol, a heresy in scale. Eternity was not supposed to be an endless circle, but a decisive victory, a straight road to heaven. The snake mocked that hope by insisting the road only bent back on itself. But for others, Gnostics, alchemists, mystics, the fear was the fascination. They saw the serpent cycle as truth. Life eats itself. Time renews itself. Nothing is wasted. To them, the snake was not a trap, but a revelation. Creation and destruction were the same gesture. Death was not failure, but fertilizer. Eternity was not a line vanishing into the distance, but a circle tight enough to hold everything inside. So serpents became the guardians of cycles, the keepers of eternity. They haunted temples and tombs, curled around staffs and shields, slithered into manuscripts and cosmology. To see a snake was to be reminded, uncomfortably, that nothing really ends, that even death might only be a skin to shed. Imagine it, a farmer in the Nile Delta, 3,000 years ago, watching a cobra slip out of its dull, papery husk. The old skin lies still in the dust, fragile, brittle. The snake, gleaming and new, glides on as if nothing happened. The farmer shudders. What he sees is not just a reptile. It is time itself, crawling forward by eating its own past. It is the Ouroboros already coiled, already waiting, long before anyone painted it on a tomb wall. When the Greeks encountered Egyptian ideas, they did what Greeks always did: borrowed them, argued about them, and then claimed they had invented them in the first place. The Ouroboros was no exception. By the time Alexander's armies marched into Egypt in the 4th century BCE, the Greeks were already fascinated by serpents. They had their own myths of Python at Delphi, of Asclepius with his healing snake staff, and of monstrous coils like Typhon. But when they met the Egyptian serpent circling eternity, they saw a symbol that could fit neatly into their philosophical debates and mystery cults. The Greeks were already a people obsessed with cycle. The philosopher Heraclitus, centuries earlier, had declared that all things flow, and that fire consumes and renews endlessly. He loved paradoxes, life and death, beginning and end, creation and destruction, as part of one eternal process. Had Heraclitus seen an Ouroboros painted on a papyrus, he would have grunted in approval. Finally, an animal that proved his philosophy in a single sketch. Plato, too, dipped his toe into serpent-shaped thinking. In the Timaeus, he describes the cosmos itself as a living creature shaped like a circle, self-contained, eternal, without beginning or end. He doesn't name the Ouroboros, but the resemblance is uncanny. The universe imagined as a serpent with no head or tail, devouring and sustaining itself forever. For Plato, the perfection of the circle made it the only fitting shape for eternity. In other words, geometry had met mythology, and the result was disturbingly serpentine. The mystery cults, however, loved the Ouroboros even more than the philosopher. In Orphism, an esoteric tradition named after the mythical poet Orpheus, the cosmos was born from a cosmic egg encircled by a serpent. Time itself, sometimes personified as the god Kronos, was depicted as a snake that coiled around the universe. The message was clear: if you wanted to understand existence, you had to make peace with the serpent. In these secret initiations, the Ouroboros became not just a picture but an experience. Initiates into Eleusinian or Orphic mysteries often underwent rituals meant to symbolize death and rebirth, descending into darkness, fasting, enduring disorientation, then emerging into light. The circle of the snake was lived, not only drawn. By suffering and emerging anew, the initiate reenacted the eternal cycle the Ouroboros represented. The Greeks also connected the serpent to medicine and immortality. The staff of Asclepius, still the symbol of healing today, bore a coiled serpent. Why? Because the snake, with its venom and skin shedding, was both healer and killer, destroyer and renewer. It embodied the tension of medicine itself. The same herb could heal or harm. The same poison could be antidote or execution. The Ouroboros echoed this duality. Death and life were not enemies but dance partners. And then came the Stoics, those philosophers who treated emotion like an unruly roommate. To them, the Ouroboros was a neat shorthand for ekpyrosis, the doctrine that the universe is periodically consumed by fire and reborn. History, in their view, was not linear but cyclical. Worlds ended, worlds began. Endless. The snake devouring its tail was the perfect emblem for a cosmos that regularly ate itself for breakfast, only to rise again as if nothing had happened. The irony, of course, is that while philosophers found in the Ouroboros a symbol of cosmic wisdom, ordinary Greeks were still mostly terrified of snakes. Farmers cursed them, mothers warned children about them, and temples kept live serpents as both pets and omens. To hold the snake is sacred while also jumping 3 feet into the air at the sight of one in the grass. That was the Greek way. Philosophy elevated what instinct feared. As Hellenistic culture spread, especially after Alexander's conquests, the serpent circle traveled with it. The merging of Greek and Egyptian traditions produced hybrid symbols, scribbled into magical papyri, and whispered in secret rituals. The Ouroboros was now more than Egyptian funerary art. It had become a portable, flexible emblem for eternity, mystery and the paradox of existence. Imagine walking into a mystery cult gathering in Alexandria around Tutipia. Candles flicker on the walls. Priests chant hymns to hidden gods. In the center, a painted serpent coils into a circle, its mouth clasping its tail. The initiates are told, this is the symbol of the old. Inside the snake, everything is one. Outside, nothing exists. Some nod in awe. Others pretend to understand. No one dares laugh at the image of a reptile chewing on itself, because they know it is not a joke. It is the universe. Thus, the Greeks gave the Ouroboros new life. They made it a philosopher's emblem, a healer's staff, and a mystic's key. By the time the Romans inherited Greek culture, the snake eating its tail was fully established as a symbol that bridged Egypt and Greece, myth and philosophy, temple and classroom. And yet, the Greeks also planted the seed of suspicion. For while they admired the Ouroboros, they also knew its darker message. Cycles mean repetition, and repetition means fate. If everything renews forever, then perhaps nothing truly changed. For a people who loved freedom, that thought was unsettling. The snake gave them wisdom, but it also gave them a shiver. By the time Christianity spread through the Mediterranean, the Ouroboros had already curled itself around centuries of Egyptian and Greek thought. But it found a particularly strange and lasting home among the Gnostics, those early Christian sects who specialized in making the bishops nervous. If the Orthodox Church insisted on linear history, creation, fall, incarnation, resurrection, judgment, the Gnostics raised their hands politely and said, "Actually, what if it's a circle?" To the Gnostics, the Ouroboros wasn't just a picture of eternity, it was a riddle about the prison of existence itself. They believed the material world was not God's good creation, but a flawed copy, built by a lower being, the demiurge. Human souls, sparks of divine light, were trapped here, condemned to be recycled endlessly, unless they woke up and escaped. In this cosmic drama, the Ouroboros was not a symbol of comfort. It was the jailer, the circle was the cage. Manuscripts discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, the same trove that gave us the Gospel of Thomas, show just how much Gnostics loved serpent imagery. In texts like the hypostasis of the archons, the rulers of the material world are often depicted as reptilian or serpentine, wrapping humanity in deception and keeping souls trapped in cycles. The Ouroboros here is not simply eternity, it is the endless rerun of ignorance. The divine Netflix series no one can turn off. But the Gnostics, with their love of paradox, didn't hate the serpent entirely. In some systems, the serpent was also the revealer, the one who offered wisdom, like the snake in Eden, whispering secrets to Eve. Orthodox Christians said the serpent brought humanity's fall. Gnostics replied, perhaps it brought humanity's awakening. The Ouroboros, then, could be both the prison and the clue to escape, both the cycle and the secret hidden within it. Alchemical and Gnostic texts often draw the serpent with inscriptions around it. One of the most famous, from the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, a Greek alchemical work from the 2nd century CE, shows the Ouroboros encircling the words hen to pan. The one is all. The Gnostic mind adored this. To them, the universe wasn't a neat hierarchy with God at the top and humans climbing ladders upward. It was a paradoxical unity, where everything contained everything else, and knowledge, gnosis, was the only way out of the loop. The snake that devoured itself whispered, "You too are both consumer and consumed, both prisoner and key." For Orthodox Christians, this was disturbing. The Ouroboros contradicted their story. The Church wanted time to move forward, with a definite end, when Christ would return and the dead would rise. Eternity for them was not an endless cycle of births and deaths, but a final resting place in heaven or hell. The Ouroboros mocked this by insisting that there was no end, only return. For the bishop writing sermons in Antioch, the symbol was dangerous. For the Gnostic scribbling in secret, it was the most honest picture of existence. The deeper fear was that the Ouroboros erased the need for salvation. If life simply devours itself endlessly, what is the point of Christ's sacrifice? If death is only the start of another lap around the circle, what need is there for a savior at all? Gnostics offered their own answer. Salvation was not from sin, but from ignorance, awakening to the knowledge that you were trapped in the serpent's coils. Christ in their texts was not primarily the crucified Redeemer, but the teacher who whispered, "Wake up, escape the circle." It's worth imagining how unsettling this must have sounded in the 2nd century. Picture a Gnostic gathering in a Roman villa, maybe 20 people huddled by lamplight. A teacher unrolls a scroll and points to the drawing of a snake biting its tail. He explains, "This is the world you live in. Birth, death, rebirth. It never ends. The rulers of this age keep you asleep, trapped in the loop. But knowledge can cut the circle." His students nod, eyes wide. Across town in the basilica, the bishop is preaching a very different message. History has an end, the kingdom of God will come, and the circle is broken by Christ. Between these two visions, the straight line and the eternal loop, lies a theological war. The Ouroboros thrived in this underground imagination, because it was ambiguous. It could be read as hope, that nothing truly dies, or as horror, that nothing ever escapes. The Gnostics leaned into that ambiguity. Their serpent was both devourer and liberator, both prison and revelation. To embrace it was to confront the uncomfortable truth that the universe might not have a destination, it might only have a cycle. This is why later mystics and alchemists, many influenced by Gnostic thought, would keep sketching the Ouroboros. It contained the riddle of existence. Is the snake a trap, or is it a key? Does it keep us bound, or does it show us that all divisions are illusions? That tension, the circle as both curse and cure, was irresistible. And so in the shadowed margins of history, while bishops thundered about heaven and hell, the Ouroboros slithered quietly on. It offered no promises, no clear answers, only the eternal riddle of the snake eating itself. If the Gnostics whispered about the Ouroboros in hidden gatherings, the alchemists practically turned it into their company logo. Open a medieval or Renaissance alchemical manuscript, and chances are, somewhere in the margins, there it is. A snake swallowing its tail, sometimes alone, sometimes circling strange emblems, sometimes painted in gaudy colors that make it look oddly cheerful for a creature devouring itself. For the alchemists, the Ouroboros was not just a symbol of eternity, it was a symbol of the whole project, turning chaos into order, base into noble, death into life. One of the earliest and most famous appearances is in the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, a Greek alchemical text from the 2nd or 3rd century CE. There, the Ouroboros encircles the words hen to pan, the one is all. This tiny phrase carried the entire weight of alchemy. Everything is connected, everything contains everything else. To dissolve, to burn, to calcine, to reduce, all of it was not destruction, but transformation. The snake proved it. The eater and the eaten are one. Alchemy thrived on paradoxes, and the Ouroboros embodied them perfectly. In alchemical diagrams, the serpent often appears black and white, or half dark and half light. It represented the union of opposites, male and female, sun and moon, life and death. The alchemist's laboratory, full of bubbling flasks and suspicious smells, was imagined as a miniature cosmos. To create gold from lead was not merely a chemical trick, it was to reenact the cosmic cycle, death feeding life, decay feeding rebirth. The Ouroboros painted on parchment was the reminder that nothing was wasted, not even failure. The alchemists also saw the serpent as the ultimate image of prima materia, the mysterious first matter from which all things were made. Like the Ouroboros, prima materia was self-contained, paradoxical, destructive and creative at once. To understand it was to understand the whole universe. Many manuscripts show the Ouroboros circling the philosopher's stone, or enclosing symbolic trees and suns, as if to say all of this is happening inside the snake's circle. In a way, the Ouroboros was the perfect mascot for a discipline constantly accused of chasing its own tail. Outsiders mocked alchemists as fools who spent their lives turning nothing into nothing. The Ouroboros agreed, and then smirked. Yes, we are going in circles, but the circle is the secret. Transformation is not a straight line, but a loop. What looks like futility is in fact the eternal cycle itself. The humor of this should not be lost. Picture an alchemist in a smoky medieval cellar, hunched over a cracked furnace, his neighbors convinced he's mad. He has spent decades trying to transmute lead into gold, always failing. And yet, on the walls of his notebooks, he draws a snake eating itself, convinced that his failures are not failures at all, but part of the circle of transformation. In a strange way, the Ouroboros gave him permission to keep failing forever, because forever was the point. But beneath the comedy lay genuine insight. The Ouroboros reminded the alchemists that destruction and creation are not opposites, but twins. To burn a substance is not to annihilate it, but to release its hidden essence. To dissolve metals in acid is not to kill them, but to open them. Even death itself, they argued, was not an ending, but a stage in transformation. The serpent, biting its tail, captured this endless recycling better than any sermon. That is why the Ouroboros often appeared in manuals with mottos, like in stercolines invenita, in filth it will be found. Gold, they believed, was hidden in decay. Wisdom was hidden in foolishness. Life was hidden in death. The Ouroboros was the visual punchline to this strange alchemical optimism. Nothing ends. Everything is reborn. Even your mistakes. Later, European alchemists continued the obsession. In the Renaissance, elaborate engravings showed the serpent coiling around suns, moons, kings and queens, locked in embrace. It circled cosmic trees, alchemical furnaces, and globes of fire. Sometimes it was two snakes, biting each other's tails, forming an infinity of The message never changed. Wholeness comes from the union of opposites. The snake, absurdly munching itself, was the emblem of ultimate wisdom. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Churchmen frowned at the imagery, suspicious that it smacked of paganism or heresy. Some scoffed at the very idea of a science that decorated itself with doodles of hungry reptiles. But for the alchemists, who lived at the blurry line between chemistry, mysticism, and madness, the Ouroboros was indispensable. It was both a secret and a reassurance. Keep circling, keep devouring, because inside the circle lies the truth. And perhaps that's why the Ouroboros endured in alchemy longer than in any other tradition. Philosophers could debate it, Gnostics could spiritualize it, but alchemists lived it. Their work was literally circular, distilling, condensing, dissolving, recombining, over and over again. The serpent biting its tail was not just a metaphor, it was their daily routine. Imagine one last scene. A Renaissance alchemist, after decades of failure, finally closes his manuscripts, his beard singed, his hands stained. He has not produced gold, he has not found immortality, but in his notebooks, page after page, the Ouroboros circles patiently, whispering that perhaps the work itself, the endless repetition, the devouring cycle, was the real treasure. The alchemist smiles, tired but content. He has not failed, he has only gone in circles, and the circle is the point. The Ouroboros was irresistible to alchemists, because it captured their favorite paradox. To create, you must first destroy. The furnace was their chapel, and fire was both executioner and midwife. Every experiment began with burning, dissolving, or breaking down a substance. From that destruction, something new was born. To outsiders, this looked like waste. A perfectly good lump of metal, reduced to ash and sludge. To the alchemist, it was the first step in creation, and the Ouroboros, endlessly devouring itself, was the perfect mascot. Alchemical texts hammered this point relentlessly. Dissolve and coagulate. Solvit coagula was the motto. Tear apart, then unite. Kill, then resurrect. It sounded violent, because it was substances had to die so they could be reborn in a purer form. Lead was not simply turned into gold, it was first destroyed, stripped of its imperfections, annihilated so thoroughly that only its hidden essence remained. The Ouroboros showed this process in a single bite. The snake destroys its tail, but also sustains itself by it. Death and life, meal and feeder, annihilation and survival, all are one. One famous alchemical illustration depicts the serpent half black, half white, biting its tail. Around it are the words unus est omnia, the one is all. The black half represented putrefaction, decay, matter breaking down into darkness. The white half represented rebirth, purification, and illumination. Together, they formed the circle. The Ouroboros was not just eating, it was transforming. Each bite was death, and each swallow was life. This dual role mirrored the alchemists' own psychology. They saw themselves as priests of nature, but also executioners, Their work demanded cruelty toward matter, burning it alive, crushing it, boiling it in foul-smelling acids. And yet they believed this cruelty revealed truth. In their laboratories, the destruction of metals was not murder, but liberation. The serpent seemed to wink at them from the page. Yes, you are killing, but only so that something better can live. The idea went deeper still. Many alchemists believed that the same principle applied to the soul. Just as metals needed to be destroyed before they could be perfected, so too did the human ego, pride, greed, attachment. All had to be dissolved in the fires of discipline. The Ouroboros was not only chemistry, but spirituality. It showed the soul consuming its lower self, so that the higher self could be born. What you destroyed in yourself became the nourishment for your transformation. Of course, the Ouroboros was also a convenient excuse. Imagine an alchemist whose experiment explodes in smoke and ruins his workshop. His neighbors shake their heads. Another failure. But the alchemist points to his sketch of the Ouroboros and insists, no, this is exactly how it's supposed to work. Destruction is part of creation. You almost admire the audacity. The snake allowed them to turn every setback into philosophy. But beneath the humor, there was genuine brilliance. The Ouroboros anticipated modern science in its way. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form. The cycle of matter, decay into soil, soil into plants, plants into animals, animals into death again, is precisely the serpent's logic. What looks like annihilation is transformation. To the alchemist, centuries before physics, the Ouroboros was proof that the cosmos wastes nothing. The ambivalence was also the allure. The snake frightened because it showed destruction as inevitable. Everything ends, everything is devoured. But it comforted because it showed creation hidden inside that destruction. The same teeth that ended were the same teeth that fell. In this way, the Ouroboros became a symbol of hope, disguised as terror, or terror disguised as hope, depending on how you looked at it. Imagine a medieval manuscript, ink smudged, a coiled serpent drawn at the center of the page. Around it, instructions: take the black dragon, dissolve it in vinegar, burn it to ashes, and from its death will rise the stone. The student reading this doesn't see literal dragons. He sees the lid in his crucible, bubbling, breaking, collapsing into nothing. And he believes, he has to believe, that this destruction hides a birth. The serpent's jaws prove it. The Ouroboros thus became more than a doodle. It was the alchemist's reassurance that the violence of the furnace was not in vain. That destruction and creation were not opposites, but phases of the same eternal motion. To watch matter collapse was to watch it prepare for perfection. To watch the snake devour itself was to understand that endings and beginnings are the same event. In the end, the alchemist's laboratory was less a place of invention than of reenactment. Every flask of bubbling acid, every lump of charred lead, was an echo of the Ouroboros. Creation and destruction circled endlessly in smoke and ash. The serpent had taught them the secret. In order to make, you must first unmake. And so each time the fire roared and the metals hissed, the alchemist smiled, hearing the faint hiss of the Ouroboros in the flame. If alchemy gave the Ouroboros its laboratory, Hermeticism gave it a philosophy. The Hermetic tradition, those mysterious writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a half-mythical blend of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, was obsessed with unity. The universe, according to these texts, was not a collection of separate things, but a single living being, woven together by correspondences. That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. The Ouroboros slithered into this system naturally, because what better image of unity than a circle that devours itself? Hermetic texts, many written in Hellenistic Egypt around the first few centuries CE, speak in riddles about God, cosmos, mind, and matter. They insist that opposites are illusions. Life and death, creation and destruction, heaven and earth, all mirror each other. To the Hermetic thinker, the universe was a grand reflection, microcosm and macrocosm, locked in endless resonance. The Ouroboros was the visual shorthand, above and below, head and tail, eater and eaten. Each was the same thing in different guises. One Hermetic manuscript shows the serpent encircling the words hen to pan, the one is all. The message was not simply eternity, but wholeness. You could not cut the circle without breaking reality itself. The universe was not a line stretching forward, but a loop containing all opposites. And that meant that to understand the divine, you didn't need to climb ladders of angels, or escape the material world. You only needed to recognize the unity already coiled around you. This was radical. Orthodox Christianity told believers that the world was fallen, broken, a place to be endured, until salvation arrived. Hermeticism countered, the world is already divine, because it is part of the circle. Nothing is excluded, even decay is holy, because it feeds rebirth. Even destruction is divine, because it completes creation. The Ouroboros was not just a doodle, it was an argument against despair. But the Ouroboros also carried a warning. If the circle was unbroken, then there was no escape. The same force that guaranteed unity also guaranteed repetition. You might transcend, but you would always return. The snake reminded Hermetic philosophers that infinity is not a staircase, but a wheel. That could be comforting or suffocating, depending on your mood. The appeal of the Ouroboros within Hermeticism was also practical. Hermetic magicians and alchemists loved correspondences. Planets mirrored metals, numbers mirrored virtues, herbs mirrored stars. They believed the human body itself was a miniature universe. To heal a person was to adjust their inner cosmos to reflect the harmony of the greater cosmos. The Ouroboros made this vision visible. Everything contained everything, the circle complete. No part of the cosmos was disposable. No part of the self was separate. For Hermetic thinkers, the serpent also hinted at the divine mind. Just as the Ouroboros consumes itself endlessly, thought can turn in circles, reflecting on itself, becoming both subject and object. The act of knowing becomes the act of being known. Philosophy becomes a snake, chewing its own tail. A realization both exhilarating and exasperating. Many Hermetic dialogues read this way. The teacher explains, the student asks questions, and soon both are circling back to the same truths in new disguises. It's intellectual Ouroboros. Imagine sitting in Alexandria, around the 2nd century CE, in a dimly lit chamber, smelling of papyrus and lamp oil. A teacher points to a drawing of the serpent circle, and explains, this is the whole of the cosmos. It is the all. Nothing exists outside. To know yourself is to know the universe. To know the universe is to know God. The students nod, half in awe, half in confusion. Outside, Roman soldiers march in straight lines, building roads that stretch endlessly forward. Inside, the philosopher insists that everything is a circle. The contrast could not be sharper. Of course, Hermeticism was not entirely fringe. It influenced early Christian mystics, Jewish Kabbalists, Islamic philosophers, and Renaissance scholars alike. By the 15th century, when the Corpus Hermeticum was translated into Latin, European intellectuals swooned. They believed they had rediscovered the primal wisdom of Egypt. Alongside the texts, the Ouroboros reappeared in engravings, painted in alchemical laboratories, scribbled in magical grimoires. For Renaissance magi, the snake was not superstition. It was science. It was philosophy. It was the cosmos in one line of scales. The irony, of course, is that the Ouroboros itself embodies the very Hermetic maxim, above and below, sacred and profane, head and tail. All are reflections. A symbol born in Egyptian tombs, filtered through Greek philosophy, and elevated by Hermetic mystics, eventually returned in the Renaissance as ancient wisdom. The snake had circled back to its own beginning, biting its tail yet again, and that is the enduring genius of the Ouroboros. It always returns. It slithers out of tombs into manuscripts, out of manuscripts into philosophy, out of philosophy, into occult bookstores, only to reappear again centuries later. Each time it is reborn, it carries the same hermetic whisper. There is no separation, only reflection. That which is above is like that which is below. By the Middle Ages, Europe was covered in cathedrals, monasteries, and parish churches, each lined with saints, angels, and biblical scenes. But the Ouroboros, once painted proudly on Egyptian tombs and copied in Greek and Hermetic manuscripts, had become a suspicious character. To the guardians of orthodoxy, the serpent biting its tail looked less like a profound emblem of eternity and more like a pagan stowaway. It whispered ideas about cycles, unity, and hidden wisdom, ideas that clashed with the linear narrative the Church fought to defend. Christianity was built on the promise that history had a beginning and an end. Creation began in Genesis, salvation arrived through Christ, and the world would conclude with the Last Judgment. This was not a circle, it was a straight line, an arrow pointing toward eternity with God. The Ouroboros, by contrast, had no ending. It promised only return, repetition, endless recycling. To a bishop it smacked of heresy, a universe without Christ's decisive intervention, a cosmos in which the crucifixion was just another lap around the loop. The serpent itself carried even darker baggage. In Christian imagination, snakes were rarely neutral. They hissed through Eden, tempting Eve into sin. They slithered in the desert as plagues upon Israel. They symbolized Satan himself, the deceiver coiling at the edges of creation. To put a snake in a circle and call it eternal felt, to the medieval mind, uncomfortably close to saying that evil itself was eternal, that even the devil had a place in the divine cycle. For a faith built on ultimate victory over sin, this was intolerable, and so the Ouroboros migrated underground. You rarely see it in the stained glass of a Gothic cathedral. You don't find it carved into Romanesque capitals, but in the margins of alchemical manuscripts. It lived on, quietly, biting its tail while the monks illuminated their psalters with saints and angels. It was a hidden symbol, tolerated in esoteric circles, but avoided in public piety. That didn't mean the Church was unaware of it. On the contrary, inquisitors and theologians knew the symbol well enough to be suspicious of it. In manuals warning against heresies, serpent circles were sometimes lumped in, with Gnostic diagrams and pagan talisman. The Ouroboros represented not just eternity, but a rival worldview, one in which salvation wasn't necessary, because the universe would renew itself anyway. It threatened to collapse the drama of sin and redemption into an endless cosmic rerun. Still, the image crept in at the edges. Medieval lapidaries, texts about the powers of stones, sometimes depicted snake circles as charms of protection. Alchemists, cloaked in secrecy, drew them alongside their retorts and furnaces. In magical grimoires, the Ouroboros circled pentagrams and cosmic trees, whispering of hidden knowledge. To the faithful, this was precisely the problem. The serpent symbolized the occult, the forbidden, the dangerous allure of knowledge outside the Church's control. Consider the contrast. While parishioners gazed at crucifixes, reminding them of Christ's once-for-all sacrifice, the Ouroboros suggested there was no once-for-all at all. While sermons thundered about the end of time, the snake whispered there would never be an end. While theology painted a cosmic battle between good and evil, the Ouroboros quietly shrugged. Both are necessary, both devour each other, both live in the same circle. The Church needed certainty, the Ouroboros offered ambiguity. Medieval thinkers were not blind to its intellectual seduction. Some scholastics debated eternal recurrence, wondering whether history might repeat itself endlessly. Others toyed with cyclical cosmologies, inherited from Aristotle and the Stoics. But official doctrine always reasserted the arrow of time, pushing back against the serpent's loop. Eternity was not repetition, they insisted it was permanence. Heaven was not another cycle of birth and death, but a final rest beyond time itself. Yet, ironically, the Ouroboros often survived in the very places the church could not fully suppress: the folk imagination and the esoteric underground. In talismanic traditions, farmers carried serpent circles engraved on metal to protect crops. In the writings of Jewish Kabbalists, the image slipped in as a metaphor for divine unity. Among wandering mystics and heretical sects, it remained a shorthand for the belief that all things return, all things are one. Imagine a medieval village priest leafing through a confiscated manuscript from a suspected heretic. On one page, prayers to Christ, on another, bizarre alchemical recipes, and in the corner, drawn in simple ink, the serpent eating its tail. The priest frowns. To him it is not just a doodle. It is a threat. It means the heretic believes the universe is a circle, not a cross, that salvation is knowledge, not grace, that eternity is not heaven, but repetition. The Ouroboros, small and silent, was more subversive than any shouted heresy. The mistrust, then, was not just about reptiles, it was about worldviews. The Ouroboros undermined the drama of Christian history by suggesting history itself was unnecessary. It undermined the promise of heaven by suggesting there was no escape from the circle. It undermined the uniqueness of Christ by suggesting that creation and destruction happen eternally, with or without him. No wonder the medieval church turned up its nose. And yet, despite the suspicion, the snake endured. It always does. You can ban it from stained glass and sermons, but you cannot erase the fascination it holds. It kept circling in the margins of books, waiting for those curious enough to find it. The serpent biting its tail was too compelling to die, an eternal reminder perhaps, that some truths cannot be flattened into straight lines, no matter how many bishops try. If the medieval church frowned at the Ouroboros, the secret societies of the Renaissance practically adopted it as their coat of arms. By the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe was buzzing with rediscoveries. The Corpus Hermeticum translated into Latin, alchemical texts copied feverishly, Kabbalistic diagrams studied alongside Christian mysticism, and tucked into these manuscripts, often in the center of elaborate engravings, the serpent biting its tail kept reappearing. Publicly, the church warned against such symbols. Privately, the curious could not resist them. One of the most important groups to embrace the Ouroboros were the Rosicrucians, emerging in the early 17th century with mysterious manifestos like the Fama Fraternitatis, 1614. They presented themselves as a brotherhood of hidden sages, heirs of ancient wisdom. Their manifestos were filled with allegories, cosmologies, and cryptic references to alchemy and Hermeticism. The Ouroboros slithered through these writings as a shorthand for the unity of all knowledge. The Rosicrucians promised renewal not just of matter in the furnace, but of religion, philosophy, and society itself. The serpent devouring its tail symbolized the death of the old world and the birth of the new, forever cycling. Freemasonry, too, took a liking to the symbol. While its lodges are better known for compasses, squares, and the all-seeing eye, the Ouroboros appeared in Masonic manuscripts as a reminder of eternity and unity. To initiates moving through the degrees of the lodge, it hinted that all opposites reconcile, all beginnings and endings meet. The snake, like the rituals themselves, was a reminder that what seems fragmented is secretly whole. In mystical Christianity, the Ouroboros resurfaced as well. Jacob Boehme, a German shoemaker turned mystic in the 17th century, filled his writings with paradoxes, light and darkness, wrath and love, creation and destruction. He often used circular imagery to describe God's self-revelation, the divine consuming and renewing itself. Though he rarely drew the Ouroboros explicitly, his readers did. They illustrated his ideas with serpent circles, convinced that the old Egyptian symbol perfectly captured Boehme's theology of opposites reconciled in God. The Kabbalistic tradition, too, absorbed it. Jewish mystics in Renaissance Europe explored diagrams of the Sephirot, the emanations of God's presence. Some Christian Kabbalists merged these ideas with Hermeticism, drawing Ouroboros circles around the tree of life. The message was consistent: the divine is endless, cyclical, unbroken. To enclose it with the serpent was to admit that even the mysteries of God mirrored the same eternal return. It's not hard to see why secret societies adored the Ouroboros. To draw it was to signal membership in an alternative worldview. The Church preached linear time, salvation through obedience, and a final end at judgment. The Ouroboros, by contrast, whispered of hidden cycles, of renewal through destruction, of knowledge that looped endless. For those dissatisfied with dogma, the serpent was a rebellious emblem, a reminder that truth could not be boxed into sermons. Manuscripts of the period are littered with it. Some show the Ouroboros circling celestial globes, as if the universe itself were wrapped in scale. Others enclose human figures, alchemical furnaces, or cryptic mottos. The image multiplied like the snake itself, feeding on its own tail and producing endless copies. To own a manuscript with the Ouroboros was to participate in the tradition of hidden wisdom, to nod silently across centuries to others who had drawn the same circle in ink and secrecy. But it was not only mystics who found it compelling. Scientists of the 17th century, still tangled with alchemical roots, also used the symbol. The chemist Auguste Kekulé famously claimed in the 19th century that he dreamed of a snake biting its tail, which revealed to him the ring structure of benzene. Whether the dream was literal or an embellished anecdote, the fact remains, even modern science found itself haunted by the ancient circle. The serpent refused to remain in monasteries or occult lodges. It kept turning up in laboratories, whispering that matter itself is circular. For the secret societies, though, the Ouroboros carried another allure. Secrecy itself, a symbol that ate its own tail, was the perfect emblem for knowledge that hid within itself, accessible only to the initiated. Outsiders saw only a reptile chewing its backside. Insiders claimed to see the cosmos in miniature. The Ouroboros became a litmus test. If you laughed at it, you weren't ready. If you stared long enough to glimpse the paradox, you were one of them. Imagine a candlelit lodge in the 17th century, wood-panelled walls lined with arcane diagrams. A group of men in cloaks pass around a manuscript. In its center, the Ouroboros ink darkened from years of handling. They nod in silence, seeing in the circle not absurdity, but promise. Outside, the townspeople sleep, confident that time marches toward judgment. Inside, the initiates believe time coils endlessly, rebirth hidden inside decay, wisdom hidden inside destruction. They are not afraid of the snake, they are its companions. And so, while bishops denounced heresy and kings enforced orthodoxy, the Ouroboros thrived underground. It became the calling card of mystics, the badge of secret brotherhoods, the scribble in margins that told you there was another way to see the universe. It circled manuscripts and imaginations alike, whispering across centuries, "The end is the beginning is the end." The Ouroboros was never content to stay confined to tomb walls or occult margins. Over the centuries it crept into cosmology, the grand stories people told about the universe itself. It was too perfect a symbol to ignore, a circle that devoured and renewed itself, just like the heavens, just like the seasons, just like history repeating on scales both small and immense. When people stared at the night sky watching constellations return each year, they didn't see progress, they saw circles. And in those circles they saw the serpent. The Greeks had already hinted at this cosmic Ouroboros. The Stoics, as we've seen, taught ekpyrosis, the doctrine that the universe is periodically consumed in fire and reborn. Every world, every age is devoured, only to be spat out again. History to them was less like a book and more like a wheel turning endlessly. The Ouroboros, though not always drawn, was the unspoken image of this belief, the cosmos itself chewing through eons. Later traditions expanded the picture. Medieval and Renaissance thinkers mapped time as a series of ages, golden, silver, bronze, iron, each one worse than the last, until collapse gave way to renewal. The Ouroboros hovered here too, sometimes drawn literally around diagrams of the zodiac, sometimes implied in the eternal return of the stars. The heavens themselves looked like a serpent's body, circling endlessly, repeating the same patterns over and over. The zodiac wheel was nothing less than a celestial Ouroboros, biting its own seasonal tail. Astrological texts from antiquity through the Renaissance often described history as cyclical. Great conjunctions of planets were said to repeat, bringing back old events in new guises. Wars, plagues, and empires were imagined as returning patterns, not linear accidents. For a peasant watching the stars from a field or a scholar poring over ephemerides, the sky whispered the same truth: the circle rules all. The Ouroboros was written in the heavens whether or not anyone drew it. In Hindu cosmology, which Europeans encountered through travellers' tales, the theme was even clearer. The ages of the world, the yugas, unfold in vast cycles lasting billions of years, repeating endlessly. The universe is created, sustained, and destroyed over and over, like a breath in and out. Vishnu reclines on the endless serpent, Ananta, floating on cosmic waters, while creation arises and collapses in his dreams. To a European Hermeticist reading about India, this was confirmation. Even across continents, the serpent devouring eternity reigned. Norse myth offered its own Ouroboros in Yarmundade, the Midgard serpent, coiled around the world with its tail in its mouth. When it finally releases its grip, Ragnarok, the end of the world, will come. But after that destruction, a new world will rise from the sea, fresh and green. Again, the Ouroboros slithered beneath the surface. The end and the beginning were the same bite. Even Christian apocalyptic thought, though officially committed to a straight line, could not escape the pull of cycle. Medieval chroniclers often spoke of history repeating itself, plagues echoing earlier plagues, wars returning in familiar forms. Augustine warned against imagining eternity as a circle, yet folk imagination often slipped back into it. After all, every sunrise looked like resurrection, every winter like death, every spring like rebirth. The Ouroboros haunted the Christian imagination like a symbol it couldn't quite exorcise. Renaissance cosmologists openly embraced the symbol again. Drawings from the 16th and 17th centuries often show the Ouroboros wrapped around diagrams of the cosmos, enclosing the zodiac, or the planetary spheres. The message was simple: the universe itself is self-contained, eternal, recycling endless. The serpent was no longer just mystical decoration, it was the very architecture of the heavens. Science, ironically, would later confirm part of this intuition. Modern cosmology speaks of cycles too. Stars born from clouds of dust, burning themselves out, collapsing into supernovae, and seeding new stars with their ashes. Entire galaxies recycle themselves this way. Even the universe itself, some scientists speculate, might oscillate in a cycle of expansion and contraction, a cosmic Ouroboros devouring and rebirthing itself across unimaginable spans of time. The symbol the Egyptians painted in a tomb might be hiding in the equations of astrophysics. But for medieval and Renaissance thinkers, the point was not physics, but meaning. The Ouroboros said that history was not random, it was patterned, woven, inevitable. Kings rose and fell, empires flourished and burned, but always in cycle. To live was to ride the serpent's back, as it looped endlessly. Your own small story, another scale on its body. Imagine a scholar in the 15th century, hunched over a desk by candlelight, copying a diagram of the cosmos. Around the concentric spheres of the planets, he draws a serpent biting its tail. To him, this is not superstition, it is the truest picture of reality. Everything is enclosed, nothing escapes. The universe is one giant Ouroboros, stars and souls included. Of course, not everyone liked this idea. To rulers, the Ouroboros was unsettling. If history was cyclical, then no empire was permanent, no king eternal. The serpent's bite guaranteed that even the mightiest crown would one day be chewed and digested. Better to believe in divine providence, linear history, and eternal kingdoms. The Ouroboros reminded them, rudely, that eternity belonged to the circle, not the throne, and so the symbol drifted in and out of cosmological diagrams, tolerated by some, shunned by others, but it never vanished. Each age found itself strangely drawn to the same unsettling image, the heavens themselves, eating and renewing, bound in the circle of the snake. By the 20th century, the Ouroboros had already lived several lifetimes. Tomb guardian, Greek paradox, Gnostic jailer, alchemical mascot, Hermetic key, cosmic diagram. But then, as if destined never to retire, it slithered into psychology. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist with a library that looks suspiciously like an occultist's attic, picked up the symbol and declared it not just mystical, but psychological. To Jung, the snake eating its tail wasn't only about the universe, it was about you. Jung loved symbols because he believed the unconscious mind spoke in them. Dreams, visions, myths, all were the psyche's way of expressing truths too deep for rational language. The Ouroboros fascinated him because it embodied what he called the self-contained process of individuation, the psyche's journey toward wholeness. A circle that devours and renews itself was to Jung the perfect picture of how the unconscious works. He described the Ouroboros as representing the union of opposites within the psyche, destruction and creation, shadow and light, instinct and intellect. In his collected works, he noted that the Ouroboros symbolizes the dragon that devours, fertilizes, begets, and slays itself. This was not biology, it was psychology. The human being, he argued, must confront and integrate the darkest parts of themselves, the shadow, in order to become whole. Just as the snake consumes its tail, we must consume and transform our own hidden impulses. The Ouroboros also represented regression and renewal. Jung observed that in dreams and myths, the serpent often appeared at moments of deep crisis or transition. For him, this meant the psyche was regressing to a more primitive state, collapsing inward to rebuild itself. The image of the Ouroboros eating itself was a warning. The psyche can destroy itself if trapped in cycles. But it was also a promise that destruction feeds renewal. To face the Ouroboros was to accept that collapse is part of growth. One of Jung's boldest interpretations was to link the Ouroboros to the archetype of the Great Mother. He saw in the serpent circle both womb and tomb, the place of birth and the place of death, unified in one image. To enter the Ouroboros was to enter the mother, to dissolve into primal chaos, only to emerge reborn. This, Jung argued, was why so many myths equated serpents with both fertility and terror. The Ouroboros reminded humanity that beginnings and endings are not separate, but one. Jung's patients often dreamed of circular or serpentine images, especially during therapy. He interpreted these as signs that the unconscious was working to unify the person, to close the loop of inner conflict. In one case, he described a patient who dreamt of a snake forming a circle around them. Rather than calling it a nightmare, Jung saw it as a message. The psyche was enclosing itself, forcing the patient to confront their own shadow. The snake was not there to kill it, it was there to integrate. For Jung, the Ouroboros also hinted at the dangers of inflation, the ego devouring itself in endless self-reflection. He warned that staring too long into the unconscious without guidance could lead to being trapped in loops, endlessly repeating the same patterns. The Ouroboros, in this sense, was both goal and danger, wholeness if integrated, madness if not. What made Jung different from earlier mystics was that he refused to relegate the Ouroboros to dusty manuscripts. He saw it alive in modern people's minds, in their dreams, in their crises. The ancient serpent, once drawn on tomb walls, was now reappearing in the office of a Swiss psychiatrist. Its meaning had not vanished, It had only changed forms. Imagine Jung, pipe smoke curling in his study, surrounded by books in Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. On his desk lies a drawing of the Ouroboros, copied from an alchemical text. He scribbles in his notebook, "The Ouroboros is the archetype of the individuation process." Outside, Zurich hums with trams and modernity. Inside, Jung insists that the ancient snake still matters, that your unconscious is busy drawing the same circle Tutankhamun's priests once painted. Critics accused Jung of mysticism disguised as science, and perhaps they weren't wrong. But his fascination with the Ouroboros helped bring the symbol back into circulation, not as superstition, but as psychology. For those who studied his work, the snake became less about cosmic cycles and more about personal wholeness. The endless devouring was not happening out there in the heavens, it was happening inside. In Jung's hands, the Ouroboros completed yet another. Born as a tomb symbol in Egypt, it had travelled through Greece, Gnosticism, alchemy and Hermeticism, only to arrive in modern psychology, where it was reinterpreted as a map of the human psyche. The serpent that devours itself was now the symbol of self becoming whole, of shadow consumed by consciousness, of destruction feeding creation within the individual soul. The snake never really changes, only its meaning does. And Jung, perhaps more than anyone in modern times, made sure the Ouroboros survived yet another age, coiled in the unconscious, waiting for dreamers to meet it again. Of all the meanings humans have given the Ouroboros, none is more haunting than its link to time. Not time as a straight arrow, but time as a wheel, eternal return, the endless recycling of events, the snake devouring its tail, not as a metaphor for eternity, but as the very mechanism of history. This interpretation fascinated philosophers and terrified the faithful. After all, if time is a circle, then you are not heading towards salvation or progress. You are running in place, devoured by the same cycle forever. The Stoics of ancient Greece had already proposed this idea. They believed in ekpyrosis, that the universe burns in a cosmic fire, collapses and then is reborn exactly as before. Every soul, every event, every decision would recur endlessly. The Ouroboros fit this doctrine like a glove. Its endless bite captured the dreadful thought that history is not a story, but a rerun. Marcus Aurelius hinted at this when he wrote in his Meditations, "All things recur, and nothing is new." In other words, get used to the snake. Centuries later, Friedrich Nietzsche would revive this ancient terror in his doctrine of eternal recurrence. He asked readers to imagine that every action, every choice, every pain and joy would be lived again and again in infinite repetition. Would you curse the idea or embrace it as proof that life is worth living? Nietzsche didn't sketch the Ouroboros, but he didn't need to. The snake's grin was already implied. Eternal return was the philosophical version of the serpent's endless meal. The problem with cycles, of course, is that humans crave endings. We want closure, victory, salvation, at the very least a final chapter. Linear time comforts us. Even if life is painful, it is heading somewhere. It's heading somewhere. Eternal return robs us of that comfort. It suggests that suffering is not leading to a conclusion. It is only coming back around. The plague, the war, the heartbreak, all of it will recur endlessly. The Ouroboros is less Hallmark card, more cosmic treadmill. This is why the Church treated the symbol with suspicion. Linear time was the backbone of Christian theology. Creation began in Eden. Salvation arrived in Christ. History would end with judgment. Eternity was not repetition, but permanence, an existence beyond time. The Ouroboros contradicted this by insisting that time itself was eternal, that there was no end, only loops. To embrace it was to risk despair. If even salvation is only another turn of the wheel, then why believe at all? And yet the symbol lingered, because cycles are impossible to ignore. Nature itself mocked linear time. Seasons repeated, stars circled back each year, crops sprouted, withered, and sprouted again. The Ouroboros was written in the very fabric of the world, no matter how many sermons insisted on straight lines. The snake, whether liked or not, coiled around every sunrise. To those outside orthodoxy, the Ouroboros was not a terror, but a revelation. Gnostic saw it as the cage of ignorance, the prison to escape. Alchemists saw it as proof that destruction breeds creation. Mystics saw it as the unity of opposites. For philosophers like Nietzsche, it was a challenge. Can you live as though your life is worth repeating forever? The snake was less prophecy than mirror. It showed what you really believed about time, and whether you could stomach it. Imagine standing in a medieval field at night, looking up at the stars. The constellations are the same your ancestors saw, and the same your descendants will see. You realize you are standing in a moment that is both new and old, part of a cycle larger than you can comprehend. In that moment, you understand the Ouroboros, not as a drawing, but as reality. Time itself biting its tail, swallowing you along with everything else. It is both awe-inspiring and horrifying. Modern science, ironically, circles back to the same imagery. Cosmologists debate whether the universe will expand forever or collapse back into itself in a big crunch, perhaps rebounding into a new Big Bang, a cosmic Ouroboros, endlessly eating and rebirthing itself. Others speculate about multiverses endlessly spawning new universes. The details differ, but the mood is the same. Time may not be a line, but a circle. The serpent's grin lingers in equations as much as in myths. The terror of the Ouroboros is that it removes escape routes. In linear time, suffering is justified by the promise of heaven or progress. In cyclical time, suffering simply repeats. Your only choice is whether to despair or to embrace the loop. For some that was unbearable. For others it was liberating. If nothing ends, then nothing is wasted. The snake that devours also sustains. This duality is why the Ouroboros endures. It is both the nightmare of repetition and the comfort of renewal. It terrifies because it denies closure. It consoles because it promises rebirth. Like time itself, it refuses to pick a side. The snake keeps eating, and history keeps circling, whether we like it or not. By the time modern psychology and philosophy had tangled with the Ouroboros, the serpent had already earned a reputation as the emblem of eternity, paradox, and cosmic cycles. But one of its most unsettling messages is also the most personal. The Ouroboros as a mirror of the self. What happens when the snake is not time, not the cosmos, not a symbol in a manuscript, but you? The image of self-devouring is grotesque at first. Who in their right mind would eat themselves? And yet, when you strip away the absurdity, it becomes a chilling metaphor for human existence. We spend much of our lives consuming our own energy, our own past, even our own identities, in order to become something new. Childhood is devoured by adulthood, which in turn is devoured by age. Every you that once existed has been consumed by the you now listening to this story. The Ouroboros whispers that the devouring never stops. This self-consuming process is often invisible until crisis forces it into view. A lost job, a broken relationship, a grief too heavy to bear. Suddenly the person you thought you were is gone, eaten alive by circumstance. Yet out of that loss, another self emerges, raw but alive. The snake has chewed off another piece, but it has also sustained you. In this way, the Ouroboros becomes not just a cosmic principle, but a deeply human one. Identity requires self-destruction. Mystics and philosophers have long hinted at this. The Gnostics spoke of shedding ignorance, like a snake sheds skin. but they also spoke of consuming the false self to awaken the true spark within. Christian mystics from Meister Eckhart to John of the Cross wrote of the dark night where the ego is stripped, broken, devoured, so that the soul can unite with God. The language of loss, even annihilation, was central to their spiritual, and in the margins of those mystical texts, scribes often sketched circles, snakes, loops, endless returns. The parallel is uncanny. Even in secular philosophy, the theme recurs. Friedrich Nietzsche's challenge of eternal recurrence was not simply about time, but about the self. Could you affirm your life so completely that you would live it again, endlessly, without changing a thing? To say yes required swallowing your regrets, your guilt, your pain, digesting them into part of who you are. The self had to become Ouroboros, consuming its past to sustain its present. Modern psychology echoes this too. Jung saw the Ouroboros as the archetype of individuation, the process by which the self integrates its shadow, those repressed, hidden parts of personality we would rather ignore. To become whole, you must eat what you have rejected in yourself. The snake's tail may taste bitter, but it is part of you. Only by consuming it do you close the circle. And yet, this is not always pretty. Self-devouring can become self-destruction. Obsessions, addictions, cycles of guilt and shame. These are forms of the Ouroboros turned against itself, eating not to sustain, but to waste away. Anyone who has watched themselves sabotage success, repeat toxic patterns, or waste years in regret, has seen the darker side of the serpent. The Ouroboros is mercilessly honest. You will consume yourself, whether it heals or destroys you. The question is whether you integrate what you devour, or choke on it. Picture, for a moment, the cycle of identity. A child's innocence, consumed by the teenager's rebellion, rebellion swallowed by adult responsibility, responsibility eaten away by age and reflection. Each stage insists it is the real you, but each is only a phase of the circle, destined to be digested by the next. By the time you are old, you are both all of them, and none of them, just as the Ouroboros is both eater and eaten, head and tail, life and death. This is why so many spiritual traditions insist on letting go of the ego. To cling to a fixed identity is to pretend you are not the serpent, but to accept change, even painful change, is to admit you are always devouring yourself and becoming new. The Buddhist concept of anatta, no self, resonates here. The self is not a permanent entity, but a process, always in flux, always consuming and being consumed. The Ouroboros circles not just the cosmos, but the soul. There is a strange comfort in this. The self you lost, the one you thought was gone forever, has not vanished. It has been eaten, transformed, digested into the person you are now. The failures, embarrassments, heartbreaks, they have not destroyed you, they have nourished you. The serpent has chewed them into sustenance. Your scars are simply the marks of what has been consumed. But the Ouroboros also warns, the process is not optional. You will lose pieces of yourself. You will shed skins. You will eat what you once were. The only choice you have is whether to fear it or to embrace it. To fear it is to fight the inevitable. To embrace it is to recognize that loss is also growth, destruction is also creation, and that wholeness requires swallowing what you most want to spit out. So perhaps the most hidden message of the Ouroboros is not about time, or the cosmos, or alchemy, but about you. You are the snake. You always have been. Every stage of your life has been a bite, every transformation a digestion. The person listening now is already being eaten by the person you will become tomorrow, and that is not tragedy, that is wholeness. The Ouroboros may have first slithered out of Egyptian tombs, but its cousins coil across nearly every mythology on Earth. Humanity has always looked at snakes and imagined something larger, cosmic serpents, world-encircling coils, guardians of eternity. The idea of a snake that marks the boundaries of creation, or eats its own tail, seems to rise naturally wherever people stare too long at both the ground and the stars. By the time the Ouroboros reached Europe, it was joining an already crowded pantheon of world serpents. Take the Norse, for instance. Jormungandr, the mid-god serpent, was tossed into the sea by the gods, where it grew so vast that it encircled the entire world. Its tail fit neatly into its mouth, completing the loop. Unlike the gentle Egyptian Mehen, who shielded the sun god, Jormungandr was a menace. When it finally let go of its tail, the end of the world Ragnarok would begin. The seas would churn, the serpent would rise, poison would flood the sky, and Thor himself would battle it to the death. Both would die, but the world would be reborn. Here was the Ouroboros with a Scandinavian accent. Eternity as a cycle of death and renewal, carried by a snake the size of an ocean. In India, the cosmic serpent takes on a more contemplative role. Ananta, also called Shesha, is the endless snake upon whom Vishnu reclines between creations. Sometimes depicted with 1,000 heads, Shesha floats on the cosmic waters, coils infinite, tail in mouth, while universes emerge and dissolve in Vishnu's dreams. Unlike Jormungandr, Ananta is not a threat, but a support, the very bedrock of existence. Time itself, divided into vast yugas, flows within his coils. When one universe collapses, he simply expands to hold the next. The serpent here is serenity, eternity not as terror, but as patience. Across the ocean in Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brought yet another variation. While not always depicted eating his own tail, Quetzalcoatl embodied the same paradox: creator and destroyer, life-giver and chaos-bringer. As a god of wind, knowledge and renewal, he shed his skin like a snake to symbolize rebirth. His myths often involve death, leading directly to creation. For example, descending into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead, which he sprinkles with his own blood, to create humanity anew. Though feathered rather than circular, Quetzalcoatl belongs in the same serpent family, the eternal return, the paradox of life through death. These myths echo one another, despite oceans and centuries between them. A serpent circles the world, or holds it up, or destroys it to renew it. The variations are telling. In Scandinavia, where winters felt like the end of the world every year, the serpent was a threat, a reminder that collapse was inevitable. In India, with its philosophies of endless cosmic cycles, the serpent was steady, endless, the mattress of gods. In Mesoamerica, where rebirth and sacrifice were central, the serpent was a feathered paradox, divine, destructive, creative. The Ouroboros fits neatly among these cousins. Its circle embodies the same truth: endings are beginnings. Destruction is creation. The world is both held together and threatened by the serpent's coil. Humanity, whether farming along the Nile, herding in Scandinavia, or building temples in Mexico, kept seeing snakes and drawing the same conclusion: this creature is eternity in scales. The appeal is obvious. Snakes were everywhere, and everywhere they defied understanding. They vanished into the ground, and reappeared, like the dead in their tombs. They shed skins and came out new, as if resurrected. They killed with venom and yet symbolized healing. To cultures without microscopes or telescopes, this was enough. The serpent was nature's own philosopher, coiling into circles, and reminding humans that life devours itself to continue. But there's another layer. The serpent as world in circle also carried a warning about boundaries. Jormungandr kept the sea contained. Ananta circled the cosmos. Even the Ouroboros itself, when drawn around Ra's solar boat, acted as a fence against chaos. The serpent is always at the edge, the frontier where order meets the unknown. To depict the world inside a serpent's coil was to admit that chaos is never far away, and that eternity depends on a reptile's bite, not slipping. Comforting in its way, terrifying in another. Imagine a Viking staring at stormy seas, convinced that beneath the waves Yarmungandr stirred. Imagine an Indian priest chanting hymns while picturing Vishnu floating on Shesha's endless coils. Imagine an Aztec worshipper gazing up at the temple of Quetzalcoatl, knowing that the god's death and rebirth mirror their own. In each case, the serpent is not just myth, it is reality, coiled invisibly around their lives. And so, while the Ouroboros remains the most famous serpent symbol in Western imagination, it is only one head of a much larger hydra of world snakes. Humanity keeps returning to the same creature, the same loop, the same paradox. Perhaps it is because the serpent embodies what we most fear and most need, that our endings will not be final, that our deaths will feed something larger, that eternity itself has scale. For all its cosmic weight, the Ouroboros has always been, at its core, a drawing. Unlike gods you must imagine, or philosophies you must wrestle with, the serpent eating its tail is easy to sketch. Two curves, a head, some scales if you're feeling fancy, and there it is, eternity in ink. This simplicity made it irresistible to artists, scribes, and mystics across the centuries. And so, if you leaf through old manuscripts or examine seals and marginalia, you'll find the Ouroboros lurking in corners, gnawing its tail with eternal patience. Some of the earliest artistic versions come from Egyptian tombs, where it encircled solar boats and gods. These were not meant for galleries. They were functional magic, painted in cramped tomb chambers, meant to guard the dead. The serpent was not decoration, it was defense. And yet, the artistry lingers. Elegant curves, deliberate circles, a sense that even in death, beauty mattered. When Greek and Hellenistic scribes adopted the symbol, they made it almost playful. In magical pipery from Roman Egypt, the Ouroboros coils around words of power, sometimes drawn as a double-headed snake, with both mouths locked on the same tail. In others, it appears with stars or letters inside its loop, as though to say, all of this exists only within my circle. One gets the sense that the scribes hunched over parchment, took secret delight in drawing it, like doodling infinity on the margins of a math notebook, but with cosmic implications. Medieval manuscripts gave the Ouroboros a new home. While official church books avoided it, alchemical treatises embraced it. Illuminated texts from the 14th and 15th centuries show brightly colored serpents, sometimes green, sometimes gold, sometimes split down the middle black and white. They often circle suns, moons, or strange hybrid creatures. One famous example, the Codex Marcianus in Venice, depicts the Ouroboros half light, half dark, encircling the words hen to pan, the one is all. It is less a doodle and more a manifesto in miniature. Marginalia was another place the serpent thrived. While monks copied Bibles or scholastic treatises, some could not resist slipping in tiny sketches in the margins, alongside rabbits jousting or knights battling snails. The occasional Ouroboros curls discreetly. Was it an act of quiet rebellion, a personal fascination, or just the medieval equivalent of drawing spirals when bored? Whatever the reason, the snake slithered into margins where no bishop was likely to look. Seals and emblems also carried the Ouroboros. Secret societies loved to stamp their correspondence with the serpent, circling cryptic initials. Some noble families adopted it into their heraldry, claiming it as a symbol of eternity, loyalty, or unity. A wax seal with an Ouroboros implied not just identity, but philosophy. Our house, like the serpent, endures forever. Whether that was true or not was another matter, but the imagery carried weight. The Renaissance explosion of print brought even more serpents to life. Alchemical books now widely circulated, printed detailed engravings of Ouroboros coiled around furnaces, celestial globes, or allegorical figures. Artists took liberties. Sometimes the snake was dragon-like, with wings and claws, Other times it was delicate and decorative, almost jewelry-like. The message stayed the same, but the style shifted with the age. One particularly striking artistic variation is the double Ouroboros, two snakes each biting the other's tail, forming a kind of infinity sign. Some manuscripts even show four, interlocking in a clover of coils. These images suggest an obsession with multiplying cycles, endless within endless, a Baroque take on eternity. The medieval imagination seemed determined to prove that if one snake could represent infinity, four would be even better. Not all depictions were solemn. Some sketches show the Ouroboros with bulging eyes, as though surprised at the taste of its own tail. Others depict it with fire in its mouth, burning as it chews. These humorous touches remind us that medieval and Renaissance artists, despite the seriousness of their philosophy, were still human. Sometimes eternity looked profound, sometimes it looked like a reptile that hadn't thought its meal plan through. And then there are the secret sketches, symbols tucked into grimoires, hidden in the folds of architecture, carved on the underside of relics. Archaeologists occasionally find serpent circles scratched onto walls, or hidden in charms. These weren't made for public display, they were personal, talismanic, meant to whisper to the owner alone, "You are inside the circle, safe, eternal." The Ouroboros in this sense was less public art and more private prayer in scales. The modern world has continued this tradition. Artists from the Romantic period onward rediscovered the serpent as a symbol of the sublime and terrifying. Today the Ouroboros appears in tattoos, logos, and fantasy novels. Graphic designers reduce it to minimalist black lines. Heavy metal bands render it in flames and fangs. In each case, the artist repeats what ancient scribes knew: two curves, one head, one tail, and you have infinity on a page. What unites all these artistic versions, from tomb to tattoo, is their persistence. The Ouroboros is endlessly dryable, endlessly adaptable. It requires no explanation, yet it provokes endless interpretation. And perhaps that is why artists love it. It is both the simplest doodle and the deepest riddle, a single circle saying more than volumes of text. Symbols are never just pictures, they are arguments. A cross declares victory through suffering. A crown declares authority through divine right. A sword declares power through... The Ouroboros, in its quiet way, declared something far more destabilizing, that history is a circle, not a line, and that all empires, kings, and thrones are merely meals waiting to be chewed. No wonder rulers frowned at it. The serpent biting its tail was not just mystical, it was politically subversive. Kings prefer straight lines. They want dynasties to march forward, banners to wave in triumph, histories to record their reigns as climaxes in the story of the world. Linear time flatters rulers. It suggests their moment is unique, their rule decisive, their kingdom eternal. Cyclical time, however, offers no such comfort. It shrugs and says, "You're just another loop, another crown, another meal for the serpent." For a monarch who just spent a fortune on a coronation, this was not an appealing message. In ancient Rome, where emperors claimed eternity by carving Roma Eterna into stone, the idea of eternal return hovered uneasily. The Stoics may have preached cycles of destruction and renewal, but the emperors preferred to imagine their city as immune. To admit that Rome was just one more turn of the wheel was to admit it would fall, as of course it eventually did. The Ouroboros was an impolite reminder that the snake always bites, even if you're wearing a laurel crown. Medieval rulers faced the same discomfort. A Christian king was supposed to embody providence, to fit into a divine plan moving from Genesis to Judgment. History was God's straight road, and the monarch walked it as his chosen agent. The Ouroboros offered an alternative story, no divine plan, just endless cycles. Victory leads to defeat, glory to collapse, only to be rebuilt again. For a king, this was not theology, it was sedition in scales. This explains why the symbol often survived in hidden manuscripts rather than royal propaganda. No monarch wanted their banners adorned with a snake, devouring itself. It implied their reign was temporary, destined to be swallowed by time. Better to commission tapestries of Christ enthroned, saints triumphant, or genealogies, stretching back to Adam. Circles were for coins and crowns, not serpents. The official story was linear, divine origin, heroic dynasty, everlasting rule. But rulers knew, deep down, the serpent had teeth. Every empire that proclaimed itself eternal was eventually chewed into memory. The Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, all had watched their banners burn. Medieval kings, for all their pageantry, must have sensed that their castles too would crumble. The Ouroboros was a symbol of uncomfortable honesty. It said aloud what history always proved: nothing lasts. This is why heretical movements often embraced cyclical symbols. To believe history repeated was to believe rulers were not irreplaceable. The world had turned before them, and would turn after them. For peasants crushed by taxes or rebels rallying in the woods, the Ouroboros offered quiet hope. Kings may feast now, but the wheel turns. Thrones too are meals for the serpent. Renaissance princes, obsessed with astrology, faced similar tension. Court astrologers drew charts mapping the cycles of stars and planets, predicting the fates of kingdoms. Many diagrams showed circles within circles, sometimes even Ouroboros figures enclosing them. For a ruler, this was both fascinating and unnerving. If the heavens ran in cycles, then perhaps power was cyclical too. Their golden age might simply be the tail end of someone else's loop. The serpent, invisible but inevitable, threatened every crown. No wonder secrecy surrounded the symbol. For mystics, it was revelation. For kings, it was danger. If time is a circle, then no conquest is final, no throne eternal. Even the mightiest monarch is reduced to one more scale on the serpent's back, swallowed without ceremony, when the cycle turns. A dangerous thought to whisper in courts where execution could follow too much honesty. Imagine a royal scribe in the 15th century, tasked with illuminating a manuscript for a duke. He copies the duke's genealogy, with careful ink lines marching downward from noble ancestors. But in the margin, almost too small to notice, he sketches a tiny Ouroboros. Was it mischief, a warning, or just an artist's private joke at the expense of royal pretension? Whatever his intent, the serpent in the margin made the same statement. The line the duke prizes so dearly is, in truth, a circle. Even in modern times, rulers dislike cyclical narratives. Politicians promise progress, nations insist on destiny, revolutions claim to be new dawn. Yet history stubbornly repeats. Wars return, economies rise and fall, empires stretch too far and snap. The Ouroboros grins at every inauguration and coronation, knowing that even the grandest ceremony is only another loop. For the powerful, this makes the symbol dangerous. It undermines propaganda, mocks permanence, and whispers that every triumph is temporary. No king wants a serpent on his banner reminding subjects that his reign will end. But for the powerless, the Ouroboros can be strangely empowering. It says no ruler devours forever. The cycle will turn. Even crowns are swallowed in the end. And so the symbol, mistrusted by rulers, adored by mystics, remained what it always had been, a quiet rebellion in scale. A circle that dared to say aloud the truth no throne could bear, that time eats kings as easily as it eats peasants, and the serpent's appetite never ends. By the time the modern era dawned, the Ouroboros had survived more lives than the creature itself could chew through. From tomb walls to alchemical notebooks, from Gnostic gospels to Hermetic dialogues, it had kept circling in the background of history. But the 19th and 20th centuries gave the serpent new skins. It shed its medieval secrecy and re-emerged in the movement we now call modern occultism, theosophy, the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, and eventually the sprawling New Age marketplace of crystals, yoga mats, and inspirational posters. The Theosophical Society, founded in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky, was obsessed with ancient symbols. Blavatsky's massive works, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, stuffed with references to Egyptian, Hindu and Gnostic traditions, presented the Ouroboros as proof of universal wisdom. For Theosophists, the snake biting its tail represented the eternal cycles of evolution and reincarnation. Blavatsky's cosmology envisioned vast rounds and races of humanity, endlessly repeating through ages. The Ouroboros was the perfect shorthand, humanity endlessly consuming and renewing itself, trapped in cosmic loops larger than history could imagine. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in London in 1887, embraced the symbol with equal enthusiasm. This secret society of magicians, which counted poets like W.B. Yeats among its members, loved elaborate rituals and diagrams. Their manuscripts often placed the Ouroboros around pentagrams or hexagrams, encircling the initiate with eternity. In their system, the serpent was a boundary, a magical fence, that both protected and contained the ritual space. To step inside the Ouroboros was to enter sacred time, outside the linear clock of the world. Golden Dawn magicians also linked the Ouroboros to alchemical symbolism, seeing it as the reconciliation of opposites, the very heart of their magical philosophy. The snake's endless bite represented the initiate's own transformation. Ego consumed, spirit reborn. As in alchemy, destruction was creation. To perform their rituals within the serpent circle was to act out the cosmic loop itself. By the early 20th century, the Ouroboros had become a familiar sight in esoteric literature. Occult publishers plastered it on book covers, tarot decks incorporated it into cards, and artists like Austin Osman Spare used it in surreal drawings. What had once been a cryptic symbol, hidden in manuscripts, now sat openly on bookshelves, ready to be purchased by anyone with a curiosity for the arcane. And then came the New Age. By the mid-20th century, as Eastern spirituality mingled with Western esotericism, the Ouroboros shed much of its menace and became a kind of cosmic comfort blanket. Yoga studios hung posters of it. Astrology books used it to illustrate cycles of reincarnation. Self-help writers declared it a symbol of personal renewal, often without mentioning its darker implications of endless repetition. In short, the Ouroboros went mainstream. This transformation is almost comic. Imagine an Egyptian priest painting the Ouroboros in Tutankhamun's tomb, convinced it was guarding the solar boat through the underworld. Fast forward 3,000 years, and the same serpent is printed on a pastel-colored book cover in a California bookstore, promising readers infinite self-care. The snake, eternal trickster, had reinvented itself yet again. But even in its New Age form, the Ouroboros kept a trace of its older power. It continued to speak to the human unease with endings. In a century of wars, collapses and rapid change, the idea of eternal cycles offered both comfort and challenge. Comfort, because it suggested that destruction always births renewal. Challenge, because it suggested that nothing truly changes, that even progress might be just another loop. Psychologists and mystics in the New Age often used the Ouroboros as a tool for meditation. To visualize the serpent eating its tail was to reflect on one's own cycles, habits, relationships, karmic patterns. Therapists influenced by Jung adopted it as a symbol for the integration of the self, the wholeness that emerges from devouring contradiction. The serpent's bite became less of a doom and more of a therapy session. And yet, the Ouroboros never lost its ambiguity. In Theosophy, it was evolution across endless ages. In the Golden Dawn, it was magical protection and paradox. In the New Age, it was comfort and renewal. But behind all these interpretations lingered the same unease. The serpent doesn't end. Its circle offers no escape. That whisper of eternal return still hissed beneath the pastel posters, reminding the attentive that eternity may be less a blessing than an endless rerun. Still, the fact that the Ouroboros can survive this many transformations says something about its power. Few symbols endure so long, in so many disguises. From pharaohs to Rosicrucians, from Gnostics to Jungians, from secret lodges to yoga retreats, the serpent has never stopped circling. It adapts, sheds skins, reinvents itself, but always bites the same tail. Imagine a modern bookstore. On one shelf, Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine with its dense cosmology. On another, a Golden Dawn ritual manual, margins scribbled with serpent circles. On another, a glossy New Age tarot deck, with the Ouroboros looping gently around a rainbow-colored mandala. Different centuries, different audiences, but the same symbol staring back with reptilian patience. It has outlived empires, dogmas and fashions. It will outlive us too. For a symbol born on tomb walls, the Ouroboros has a surprising knack for sneaking into laboratories. While priests, mystics and occultists drew it for spiritual reasons, modern science occasionally rediscovers the same looping logic in its own diagrams. The serpent that devours itself, once a hieroglyph of eternity, has reappeared as metaphor in chemistry, biology, and even physics. It is as if the scientists, despite their insistence on rationality, can't quite escape the snake's grin. The most famous scientific Ouroboros belongs to Auguste Kekulé, the 19th century chemist who helped crack the structure of organic compounds. Legend has it that one evening in 1865, after years of puzzling over the structure of benzene, Kekulé dozed off by the fire and dreamed of a snake biting its tail. When he woke, he realized the molecule must be a ring, carbon atoms arranged in a circle rather than a straight chain. He had literally dreamed chemistry's Ouroboros into existence. Whether the dream happened exactly that way or not hardly matters. The story spread, and chemists adopted the serpent as a kind of mascot for discovery. Here was a molecule shaped like eternity, a scientific diagram that echoed an Egyptian tomb painting. The idea that modern chemistry owed a debt to a half-mystical dream was too delicious to resist. Kekulé himself admitted later that "let us learn to dream" was the best advice he could give young scientists. The Ouroboros, it seemed, had slithered straight into organic chemistry. But it didn't stop there. Biologists, peering into the secret of life, also found serpents waiting. DNA, with its double helix, endlessly replicating, became another kind of Ouroboros. Information devouring and reproducing itself. Cells consume energy, break it down, recycle it, and live again. In every organism, life feeds on itself to continue. Proteins fold and unfold. Cells die so others can live. Ecosystems thrive on the death of one species to nourish another. Biology is one long snake eating its tail. In physics too, the cycles reappear. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, it only changes form. Heat dissipates, matter decays, but nothing ever truly disappears. Stars collapse, scatter their ashes across galaxies, and from those ashes, new stars ignite. Entire galaxies recycle themselves. Even the universe itself, according to some cosmological theories, may collapse back into itself and explode again, an endless loop of expansion and rebirth. If the cosmos is a serpent, then its jaws are wide enough to eat galaxies whole. This circular vision of science unsettles the same way it did in myth. We like to imagine progress, life improving, energy moving forward, the universe heading somewhere. The Ouroboros says otherwise, that all motion is recycling, that creation is just destruction in disguise. In a laboratory, this looks like efficiency. In a temple, it looks like eternity. Either way, the snake is there, lurking in equations and experiments. The irony is almost comical. For centuries, religion accused the Ouroboros of being heretical, occult, and yet modern science, without meaning to, ends up sketching its outlines again and again. A chemist dreams it, a physicist calculates it, a biologist observes it. None of them are looking for Egyptian serpents, yet they find themselves face to face with the same idea. Life consumes itself to continue. The cosmos devours itself to endure. Even technology shows hints of the serpent. Think of the recycling symbol, 3 arrows in a loop, endlessly circling. It is corporate Ouroboros, proof that even our garbage is fated to become something else. Renewable energy, closed ecological systems, even the circular economies futurists dream of, all echo the old reptiles' logic. Humans, whether mystics or engineers, can't resist circling back to the same design. Yet science, unlike mysticism, tends to strip the Ouroboros of its poetry. In textbooks, it's not eternity, but closed systems, not cosmic unity, but energy conservation. Still, the symbol lurks in the background, reminding us that we're telling the same story in different language. Kekule's benzene dream is still recounted in chemistry classrooms, half as folklore, half as students smile at the image of a chemist rescued by a sleepy hallucination of a snake. And yet, without that vision, modern organic chemistry might have taken decades longer to mature. The Ouroboros in science, then, is not superstition revived, but metaphor reborn. It allows scientists to speak about cycles too vast, or too abstract, for formulas alone. Energy looping forever. Imagine a snake eating its tail, DNA endlessly copying itself. Imagine a serpent that feeds on its own body. The metaphors linger because they resonate. Even in a laboratory full of microscopes and equations, humans still think in symbols. Imagine Kekule waking from his dream, heart pounding, as the image of the snake dissolves into logic. Imagine the astronomer watching galaxies recycle themselves, whispering equations that sound suspiciously like myth. Imagine the biologist describing ecosystems as closed loops. None of them intend to be mystics, yet all of them circle back to the same image. The snake grins. It has been waiting for them since the beginning, and so the Ouroboros survives, not just in temples or occult lodges, but in laboratories and lecture halls. It is painted in tombs, copied in grimoires, dreamed by chemists, and modeled by physicists. Eternity may no longer wear scales, but the logic is the same. Nothing begins, nothing ends. Everything devours itself to continue. The serpent has only changed its vocabulary. At the end of our long walk through tombs, manuscripts, monasteries, laboratories, and lecture halls, we are left with the same stubborn image, a snake biting its tail. It should be ridiculous. It should have been forgotten, and yet here it is, still coiled in our imagination, still circling every discussion about life, death, and eternity. The Ouroboros endures because it says something we can never quite stop thinking about, that life is not a straight line, but a part of its persistence lies in its simplicity. Anyone can draw it. A child with a stick in the sand, a monk with ink in the margin, a chemist dozing by the fire, 2 curves, a head, a tail, done. And yet, in that simplest of forms hides the deepest riddle. Beginnings and endings are not separate. They meet. They devour. They renew. The more we stare at it, the more it stares back, demanding we admit that life is stranger than we like to think. It also survives because it is honest. We may comfort ourselves with progress, salvation, or destiny, but the Ouroboros whispers that nothing escapes cycles. Civilizations rise and collapse. Generations are born, live, and vanish. Suns burn, die, and feed new suns. Even in our daily lives, we repeat patterns: work, eat, sleep, wait. To live is to loop. The serpent simply points out what we already know, but prefer not to say aloud. Everything is temporary, and everything feeds what comes next. Yet, the Ouroboros is not just doom. Its bite contains comfort too. If nothing ends, then nothing is wasted. If destruction feeds creation, then death feeds life. This is why it has been painted in tombs and whispered in mystical texts. It reassures us that endings are not voids but transformations. That even in collapse, there is renewal. The snake frightens, yes, but it also soothes. Its jaws close, but its circle holds. There is also something mischievous about it, which may explain why mystics and heretics loved it, while kings and bishops feared it. The Ouroboros mocks authority. It tells every empire that it is temporary, every throne that it will be devoured, every dogma that it will loop back into something new. It levels the powerful and humbles the proud. A serpent doodled in the margin says more about history than a king's inscription in stone. No wonder rulers tried to ignore it. The snake was laughing at them, and perhaps this humor is why the Ouroboros has always appealed to humans who think too much. It is at once profound and a cosmic principle, yes, but also a reptile chewing on itself, like a creature that forgot how food works. To take it seriously is to face eternity. To laugh at it is to admit that eternity itself might be a joke. Either way, it wins. The snake never needed worshippers. It only needed witnesses. We keep staring at it, because it is also a mirror. When you look at the Ouroboros, you see your own life reflected. The person you once were is gone, devoured by the person you are now, and the person you are now will be devoured by the one you become. Every identity, every stage, every self is both eater and eaten. The Ouroboros is not just in the cosmos, it is in you. The circle of your life, your habits, your growth, your losses. Each bite hurts, but each bite sustains. And finally, the Ouroboros endures because it feels inevitable. Even when science strips away myths, it circles back to cycles, ecosystems, recycling energy, DNA replicating itself, galaxies collapsing and reforming. Even when psychology dissects the unconscious, it sees circles of shadow and self. Even when religion insists on straight lines, the seasons, the stars and the soil betray it with loops. The serpent, in the end, is always right there waiting. So we arrive at the final question. What do we do with it? Do we fear it as the church did, because it robs us of ending? Do we worship it as mystics did, because it promises unity? Do we reduce it to a scientific metaphor like Kekule's benzene ring? Or do we simply laugh, recognizing that the universe's deepest secret might be a snake that forgot to stop eating itself? Whatever the answer, the Ouroboros doesn't care. It will keep circling. It will keep appearing in art, in science, in dreams, in the corners of notebooks. It will outlast us as it outlasted pharaohs, philosophers and alchemists. The serpent eats. The serpent renews. The serpent waits. And maybe that is the final lesson. Eternity isn't somewhere else waiting after death. It's here already. In the circle we're already living. Every ending is another beginning. Every loss another renewal. Every death another life. The Ouroboros grins with scales and teeth, and whispers, "You are inside me already."